Okay, so you're all well aware of us as the Arua Water Centre of Excellence and all of our partners. And those of you that were part of writing the proposal will know the case for support that we wrote to get the funding. And it's important to share this now because we brought in social science supervisors and senior social science researchers quite late in this process. So Matthew, we are learning about our commitment to transdisciplinary research and drawing social science researchers to become part of our nodes. So we're really grateful to have you here. The idea was that we would be looking at SDG 6, and we have a model that relates this SDG around water to all the other SDGs and how it contributes to taking us forward to societal and environmental well-being. And we have two research questions. We have nodes that are looking at pollution, particularly in Lagos and Kampala. We have a Rwandan node that is looking at biomonitoring, which looks at how we use biological indicators to tell us how healthy water systems are, very often in relation to pollution. And then we have three nodes that are looking at water at a landscape scale. There's Ethiopia, who's looking at landscape restoration, Senegal, who are forefronting the effects of large dam development on small local holders. And then there's you guys, and you know what you're doing. You've got this complex Great Ruaha system with multiple users at a water energy food nexus with energy generation, large-scale agricultural production, and the issues of small farmers. Now, when we are trying to deal with complex, difficult and interrelated problems, you have to bring together a large range of different ways of knowing and knowledge. And we packaged a novel way of bringing this together in a practical way that could deliver outcomes from development money. And what we, out of the theory of how these things work, we have paid a lot of attention to context, because context drives how you can actually do things. And we called that context work bound. We need to know what the boundary of our work is in relation to the things that surround it, that aren't inside but affect it, and the boundary that contains our particular problem and the elements inside that affect it. Then we take this contextual understanding into the set of people who are affected by the problem, the people who experience it and the people who are responsible for managing it. And we put in research to try and catalyze progress towards a better outcome. And then, because we need to learn as we go, and because our systems change with time, we're involved with monitoring and evaluating how we're doing. And because of the way we work, where we believe that people are deeply embedded in and connected to these problems, the kind of monitoring and evaluation that we do is participatory. It includes us as a team and the people affected by the problem. And we believe that learning out of the complex systems helps us adapt and keep track of how things are changing. And so we have monitoring and evaluation as we usually know it, embedded in participation, reflection, and learning. Now, we imagined being able to work over a much longer period with our stakeholders, with the people involved, but we can't do that in a year. So we have short-circuited this adaptive systemic approach to the first two stages, including our stakeholders, to position them in knowing each other and the problem, and using the research that we can do in a year. We know that's not as satisfactory as what we had hoped. So here is how we hope to make this uncomfortable cut. We are still committed to and believe in our adaptive systemic approach. We are deeply committed to linking the way science works with social science and the humanities. And so what we've planned retains this interaction between science and social science knowledge, driving to shift problems. Now you'll see here I've written science in blue and social science in red. So if you keep that color hint in your minds, then you'll see as we go to a bit of a more complicated picture, you've got science information in a blue box and social science information in a red box. You'll also see we have a green box popping up and even a small yellow one. Let's start with this picture. What I've drawn here is an oval, which is your context. It applies to all of the nodes, but this is your area that you're working in. And what you've done is you've produced a bound document that tells us about your context, and we're now busy with workshops. And this context holds a problem statement to do with land, water, and people. And the people of particular interest are those people who experience a problem in relation to land and water, and people who are responsible for managing the land and water system. And here we are, we're the team, and we're hoping that research acts as a catalyst to shift to, or have the potential to shift to, a better state. And we're doing two pieces of research. We're actually doing three pieces of research, but in this diagram, the two pieces of interest are research on governance, which is the relationship between the people and the problem, and research on the problem itself, which we've called science, and governance has drawn in social science research. Then, because we have this new idea, this ASA, we're also doing research on the ASA process. We're doing research on ourselves in terms of the way we are practicing what we do. Let's take that a tiny bit deeper. So, what we are asking you to do is to focus your RAs for the time between now and the end of January next year on producing a publishable paper, a manuscript that is ready to be submitted to a journal. So the journal identified, the work done, the analysis, the writing, the paper in a manuscript form for an identified journal. How are we going to do that in a year? We're putting all of the resources into that process. And we're doing it for all of our nodes. And here we're going to be talking about you, UDSM. We are putting a hub postdoc into your team. In this case, it's Rebecca Powell. And Rebecca, when I've finished this, maybe you can turn on your camera and wave, because I don't think you've met any of the team. But Jane, you know well, and so Jane Tanner, Jane is the hub researcher, and Rebecca is the hub postdoc. They are going to work with your research assistants, so Gift, Twaha, and Augustine. And you're going to be writing up an aspect of your problem. One of the things, you've got a big complex set of work that you're thinking of and that you've planned, but we want you to draw out one aspect that you will be able to complete the research, analyze the results, and write up by January next year. And so we're going to ask the social science researcher to contribute to two things. One is this paper we're talking about, and the social science researcher is going to be offering a deep contextual understanding And the science researcher, RA, is going to be offering a piece of scientific work with results. And they're going to be working together. Now, the tool that we're going to use to help you to frame the social science and the science into a clearly integrated story is a framework developed by Frances Cleaver, who's part of our research team that she published with Frank. So we're calling it the Franks and Cleaver framework. And I'm going to be taking you through that framework in a bit. And that framework has various elements that both the social science RA with your supervisor and the science RAs with your supervisor are going to populate in order to write this paper. Now, the advantage, or one of the advantages of using this framework, is then we will have 6 papers using a framework, a common framework, and we then have the opportunity of writing some really important comparative work. But that is something that we're going to have to find the funds to do. So we're asking you to please use this framework and to invest in using the framework to both bring science and social science together and to allow us the opportunity in the future for comparative work. Now, the idea is that the postdocs are going to drive this process of RAs writing papers. And so they are going to develop a publication community of practice. They're going to organize meetings, and the postdocs are going to be working with you RAs to produce this paper so that by the end of all this money, we will have co-authored papers for postdocs, for senior researchers, and for RAs. Where a paper is part of your thesis work, and the paper now has multiple authors, it's going to be very important that the RA with the thesis becomes the senior author, so the rest of us are in support, and that the role of the RA is clearly explained. Most journals today ask you to say, what is the role of the different authors? So by putting us into a support team, we're not stealing the intellectual property of our RAs who are students. We're offering a supportive environment that gets a piece of work into the international literature as quickly as possible. Now, what is happening at the same time is that in a meeting like today, we have a whole lot of people together, and this is part of the adaptive systemic approach. What we're doing today is we are co-developing and adapting to this huge hit of the money being cut. And Matthew Weaver, who is one of our hub postdocs, has found a theoretical framing around value creation. What is the value of working in this ASA way? And he's going to be working with the KwaZulu-Natal RAs to build research on how we are able to put the research we do into these complex places. And so this publication COP will also be contributing to this research and also will have opportunities for co-authorship. So we're asking you to participate in a focused effort to be able to deliver one of the pieces of research you've planned into a paper in both science and social science. Now, just as an aside, in Ethiopia, their students have to write a draft paper as part of their theses. And they want to keep the social science RA's work separate or identifiable from the science RA. And so what they've decided to do is to have a paper title with part 1 being a science presentation, and the same paper title, part 2, with social science, with the discussions of both papers, bringing the integration together. So there is flexibility in your working with us to produce publications out of it, but the minimum is a commitment to 1 paper. Now, just to give you an idea of how this Franks-Cleaver framework is really useful for holding the data that we're going to be using to write the papers. The framework envisages that we have a good understanding of actors and agents. And you know this because we focused right from the beginning on you understanding the stakeholders. Now, we'll share this paper with you. And the paper was written out of water governance and poverty. You don't have to take that focus. It's water governance and your particular problem and the outcomes for your particular stakeholders. So here, but the principles of the framework hold really well. So we're interested in stakeholders. Those are the people experiencing the problem and the people responsible for it. And we are interested in the resources that they have to address the problem. And these can be material and non-material. And then we're interested in the mechanisms. How is it that these resources can be used to shift outcomes for people? And if you look down, for the ecosystem, for the biophysical environment. And by paying attention to the mechanisms, we start to have some idea of the processes that drive the problem that we're trying to deal with. So what we're going to do is, out of your research, we're going to be picking out knowledge that helps us to populate and understand the parts of this model, this framework. And this just gives you some extra information where it says resources can be things like human capacity, economic resources, technology, and the whole of the biophysical involvement. Where mechanisms can be things like user groups, associations, families, customary and modern land and water rights. All these ways, these mechanisms for accessing benefit from water resources. And then there are the outcomes. What is happening? What's actually happening on the ground? What are the outcomes? Because we are not in 1 year going to be able to shift outcomes, but we should be able to pinpoint some mechanisms that might be levers of change, opportunities for interventions that can shift the problem. And out of that, we can pinpoint and also imagine processes of management. So that's what we're asking you to use to hold your data. And that is me for this part of this morning, and open for questions.